Marcus Washington's hands had saved hundreds of lives. As one of the most skilled cardiothoracic surgeons in Boston, his fingers possessed an almost supernatural precision. Tonight, they trembled against the steering wheel of his Tesla. The hospital had called 20 minutes ago. A donor heart had become available for Jacob Peters, a 14-year-old boy who had been on the transplant list for 11 agonizing months. The heart was viable, but the window was brutally tight. 4 hours maximum. Marcus checked the clock. 1:37 a.m. The empty road ahead stretched into darkness, with only his headlights cutting through the night. He pressed the accelerator slightly, bringing his speed to 45 in the 40-mile zone. 3 minutes would make all the difference for Jacob. The GPS estimated his arrival at Boston Memorial in 17 minutes. He didn't notice the police cruiser until its lights flashed behind him. Marcus exhaled slowly, reminded himself to remain calm. A minor delay. He signaled and pulled over to the shoulder of Lexington Avenue, in the heart of Westland Hills, one of Boston's wealthiest neighborhoods. His Tesla came to a gentle stop. Marcus lowered his window, reached for his wallet, and waited. The credentials around his neck, his hospital ID with Dr. Marcus Washington, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, clearly visible, hung against his blue scrubs beneath his open overcoat. In his rearview mirror, he saw 2 officers emerge from the patrol car. Their flashlights swept across his rear license plate and trunk before directing their beams toward his window, momentarily blinding him. "License and registration," the first officer said, his tone clipped and authoritative. Marcus noticed the nameplate, Davis. Officer Davis was white, early 30s, with a military-style haircut and rigid posture. "Of course, officer," Marcus replied, keeping his voice measured and calm. He handed over his license and pulled up the vehicle registration on the car's display screen. "I apologize for the speed. I'm a surgeon at Boston Memorial, heading in for an emergency heart transplant. A 14-year-old boy is waiting for me." Officer Davis didn't respond, instead studying Marcus's license with exaggerated scrutiny. The second officer, Ron Elds, according to his nameplate, circled to the passenger side, shining his light through the windows, sweeping across the leather interior. "Step out of the car, please," Davis said suddenly. Marcus blinked. "Officer, I'm sorry, but I'm genuinely heading to perform emergency surgery. Every minute counts right now. Could we possibly—" "Sir," I said, "step out of the vehicle." Davis interrupted, his hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon. Now, Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He recognized what was happening. He'd experienced it before, but not tonight. Not with Jacob's life hanging in the balance. "Officer, please. I'm Dr. Marcus Washington, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Boston Memorial. Call the hospital if you need verification. A boy will die if I don't get there in time." Reynolds had moved back to stand alongside his partner. "If you're really a doctor, then you shouldn't have a problem following directions," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Exit the vehicle." With deliberate movements, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out. Standing at his full height of 6'2", he was taller than both officers. He wore navy blue scrubs under his open black overcoat, his hospital ID card and credentials hanging visibly from his neck. His surgical cap was folded in his pocket, ready for the operation. Davis looked him up and down. "Where'd you get that outfit?" "Halloween store." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "These are my scrubs. I'm on my way to surgery." Reynolds laughed, a short, humorless sound.
"Yeah, sure."
"At 2 in the morning. Heart transplants happen when donor organs become available," Marcus explained, working to keep his voice level. "I have less than 4 hours to complete this procedure once the heart arrives. Please call the hospital." Davis ignored him, stepping closer. "Sir, why are you in this neighborhood tonight?" The question struck Marcus like a physical blow. He gestured to the road. "This is the fastest route to the hospital from my home in Concord." "Have you been drinking tonight?" Reynolds asked, moving to stand slightly behind Marcus. "No, I don't drink. I'm a surgeon on call." Marcus pointed to his credentials. "Please, just verify my identity. A child's life depends on me getting to that hospital." Davis shined his flashlight directly at Marcus's face, causing him to squint and turn away slightly. "I'm going to need you to consent to a search of your vehicle." "What? Why?" Marcus asked, genuine confusion mixing with mounting dread. We've had reports of drug trafficking in luxury cars through this area, Reynolds said. And your behavior seems erratic. Marcus stared at them in disbelief. My behavior? I'm trying to get to a hospital to save a child's life. Sir, lower your voice, Davis commanded sharply. Marcus took a deep breath. I do not consent to a search. I need to get to the hospital immediately. Call my department if you need to verify who I am. The officers exchanged a look. Davis stepped back. Put your hands behind your back. What? Marcus felt as though he'd stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. You're arresting me. On what grounds? Suspicion of driving under the influence and possible possession of narcotics, Reynolds answered. Turn around, hands behind your back. This is absurd. Marcus protested, but complied, turning slowly. You're making a terrible mistake. A boy could die because of this. The cold metal of handcuffs closed around his wrists with a decisive click. The sound echoed in Marcus's mind like a death knell not for him, but for Jacob Peters, waiting on an operating table that his surgeon would never reach in time. Davis began reciting Miranda rights while Reynolds patted him down. Marcus closed his eyes, calculating time. It was now 1:46 a.m. The heart would arrive at the hospital around 2:15. The backup surgeon, Dr. Helen Chen, was skilled but had never performed this particular procedure on a pediatric patient. My phone is in my left coat pocket, Marcus said as Reynolds found it. Please call the hospital. Boston Memorial, Cardiothoracic Surgery Department. Ask for Dr. Chen. Tell her I've been detained and she needs to start prep for Jacob's transplant. Reynolds ignored him, instead scrolling through the phone's lock screen. Marcus provided it without hesitation. 1479. Please make that call. Instead, Reynolds began looking through his recent calls and messages. Lots of hospital numbers here. He noted to his partner, then turned to Marcus. So you work at a hospital. Doesn't mean you're not involved in something else. Officer Davis, Marcus said, directing his words to the senior officer. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred. I am a surgeon heading to perform life-saving surgery. Every minute we spend here decreases that boy's chances of survival. Davis was unmoved. We're going to search your vehicle now. No, you don't have my consent. Marcus insisted, knowing his rights even as he felt the situation spiraling further out of control. Your vehicle fits the description of one linked to drug activity in this area. Davis stated flatly. That gives us probable cause. It was a lie, and they all knew it. Marcus's customized Tesla Model S was hardly inconspicuous, and certainly not a vehicle drug dealers would choose for anonymity. While Reynolds held Marcus by the arm, Davis began searching the Tesla, opening compartments, lifting floor mats, checking under seats. Marcus watched in mounting horror as minutes ticked by, precious, irreplaceable minutes that belonged to Jacob Peters. Officer, I understand you're doing your job. Marcus tried again, modulating his voice to sound reasonable, non-threatening. But a child's life is literally at stake. Please just call the hospital. Reynolds tightened his grip. If you're really who you say you are, why are you so nervous? Got something to hide? Doc. Marcus felt something snap inside him. Not anger, despair. I'm nervous because my patient is going to die if I don't get to that hospital. I took an oath to do no harm, and right now, your actions are preventing me from saving a life. Davis emerged from the car. Vehicle's clean, he admitted reluctantly. Then please release me, Marcus urged. We've wasted almost 20 minutes already. The officers exchanged another look, a silent communication that Marcus couldn't decipher. Davis pulled out his own phone and stepped away, speaking quietly. Reynolds kept his hold on Marcus's arm, the handcuffs biting into his wrists, the wrists that should have been scrubbed and gloved by now, ready to accept a donor heart and give it new life in Jacob's chest. 3 excruciating minutes later, Davis returned. Dispatch confirmed there's a Dr. Washington on staff at Boston Memorial. Relief washed over Marcus. Thank God. Please, we need to hurry. But Davis wasn't finished. But we can't confirm you're him. We'll need to take you in to verify your identity. What? No. The desperation in Marcus's voice was raw and undisguised now.
Look at my ID! Call the hospital directly!
Ask them to describe me. Hospital ID badges can be faked, Reynolds said dismissively. We need to follow protocol. While you follow protocol, a child dies, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Is that what you want on your conscience? Davis's expression hardened. Get in the patrol car. As they led him to the police cruiser, Marcus caught sight of his watch. 2:03 a.m. The heart would be arriving at the hospital in minutes. Jacob would be anesthetized, his chest prepared. Dr. Chen would be trying to reach him, wondering where he was. Police? Marcus said one final time as they guided him into the back seat. Just call the hospital. Ask for Dr. Helen Chen. Tell her to start without me. The door slammed shut, sealing him in a cage of glass and metal. Through the partition, he heard Reynolds say to Davis, "Guy really committed to that story, huh?" Davis shrugged. They all have a story. As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus leaned his head against the cold window, watching his Tesla and Jacob's chance at life recede into the distance. His hands, those precision instruments trained through decades of education and practice, lay useless in his lap, bound together like those of a common criminal. For the first time in his distinguished career, Dr. Marcus Washington would not arrive in time to save his patient. The precinct was a jarring contrast to the operating room, chaotic, where Marcus's domain was orderly, loud where surgery demanded quiet, careless where his work required precision. Officers moved about with a casual indifference that seemed obscene given the gravity of what was transpiring. Marcus stood at the processing desk, still handcuffed, watching the clock on the wall with acute awareness of each passing minute. It read 2:27 a.m. The heart would be in Boston Memorial now. Dr. Chen would be making the initial incision, if she had decided to proceed without him. Name? Asked the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair and deep, set eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Dr. Marcus Washington, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Boston Memorial Hospital. Marcus answered. Please, I need to make a call to the hospital immediately. The sergeant barely looked up from his computer. Phone privileges come after processing. Sergeant. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. A 14-year-old boy named Jacob Peters is on an operating table right now, waiting for a heart transplant that I am supposed to be performing. I am begging you, call the hospital. This caught the sergeant's attention. He looked up, studied Marcus's face, then glanced at officers Davis and Reynolds who stood nearby filling out paperwork. What's he in for? The sergeant asked them. Davis looked up. Suspicious behavior, possible DUI, though he refused testing. Vehicle matched a description for drug trafficking. The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked back at Marcus, taking in the scrubs visible beneath his coat. The credentials still hanging around his neck. You pulled over a doctor on his way to surgery. There was a note of incredulity in the sergeant's voice. We couldn't verify his identity. Reynolds defended. Anyone can buy scrubs and a fake ID. The sergeant sighed heavily, then reached for his phone. What's the number for Boston Memorial? Thank you. Marcus breathed, the first hint of relief he'd felt since the red and blue lights had appeared in his rearview mirror. He provided the main hospital number, along with Dr. Chen's direct line. While the sergeant dialed, Davis stepped closer to Marcus. If you're lying, that's another charge, he warned. Marcus didn't respond, his attention focused entirely on the sergeant's call. Yes, hello, this is Sergeant Phillips with Boston PD. I need to verify something. A pause. Do you have a Dr. Marcus Washington on staff, Chief of Cardiac Surgery? Another pause. He's here at our precinct. Claims he was on his way to perform a heart transplant. The sergeant's expression changed as he listened to the response. I see.
Yes, I understand.
We'll have him there as soon as possible. When he hung up, his face had darkened. He looked at Davis and Reynolds with barely contained anger. Uncuff him now? Reynolds hesitated. Sarge, we were just following.
Now, Reynolds!
The sergeant barked. As Reynolds reluctantly removed the handcuffs, the sergeant turned to Marcus. Dr. Washington, I don't know what to say. The hospital confirmed everything. They've been trying to reach you for over an hour. Marcus rubbed his wrists, feeling the indentations where the metal had dug into his skin. Jacob Peters, he said. The boy. Did they say? The sergeant's face told him everything before the words came. They said Dr. Chen attempted the procedure. There were complications. The boy didn't make it. The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. He reached out to steady himself against the desk. A boy was dead. Jacob Peters, who loved video games and wanted to be a marine biologist, had died on the table. Because Marcus hadn't been there. Because two officers had decided he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Marcus said, his voice hollow but determined. "Of course." The sergeant nodded. "I'll personally, not just against these officers." Marcus interrupted, looking directly at Davis and Reynolds, who now stood uncomfortably to the side, "but against the Boston Police Department for policies that encouraged this outcome. And I want my lawyer." The room fell silent. Even the background noise of the precinct seemed to dim as the weight of Marcus's words settled over everyone present. "We can arrange for a patrol car to take you to the hospital," the sergeant offered lamely. "No," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "I'll call a car. I don't want to spend another second in a police vehicle." As he waited for his ride, Marcus stood apart from everyone else in the precinct, a solitary island of grief and rage. He made 2 calls, one to the hospital to speak with Dr. Chen, and one to his attorney, Miranda Jackson, known throughout Boston as a fierce advocate for civil rights. When Miranda answered, despite the hour, her voice was instantly alert. "Marcus, what's happened?" "I need you," he said simply. "A child died tonight because I was detained by police for driving while black in Westland Hills." There was a momentary silence on the line as Miranda absorbed this. When she spoke again, her voice was steel. "Document everything. Take photos of any marks from the handcuffs. Note the officers' names and badge numbers. I'll meet you at your place in an hour." "Miranda," Marcus said before hanging up, "I want them to feel this. I want the system to feel this." "They will," she promised. "This ends with more than an apology and a settlement." As Marcus finally left the precinct, dawn was breaking over Boston, the beginning of a new day. For the Washington family, it marked something else, the beginning of a battle that would reshape Marcus's life and legacy in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Dr. Marcus Washington had spent his career saving lives with surgical precision. Now, he would apply that same precision to excising something else, the cancer of systemic injustice that had claimed Jacob Peters as surely as any failed heart. The Washington residence in Concord was typically a sanctuary, a colonial revival home, set back from the road on 2 secluded acres, with tall windows that filled the space with natural light. Marcus had purchased it 5 years ago, after his promotion to chief of cardiothoracic surgery, seeing it as both an achievement and a refuge from the intensity of his work. This morning, it felt like neither. Marcus sat at his kitchen island, still in his scrubs, having refused to change. The fabric was a physical reminder of where he should have been hours ago. Coffee steamed in a mug before him, untouched. Across from him, Miranda Jackson reviewed her notes, occasionally glancing up at him with eyes that were both compassionate and calculating. At 52, Miranda was a formidable presence, a black woman who had spent 3 decades fighting civil rights battles in courtrooms across Massachusetts. Her silver, streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a casual but elegant pantsuit despite having been summoned before dawn. "The hospital's legal team will be in touch today," she said. "They'll want to manage this carefully." Marcus nodded absently. "Jacob's parents. I need to speak with them." Miranda's expression softened. "Marcus, that's not advisable right now. I was their son's doctor. I promised them I would be there." His voice was steady but threaded with pain. "I need to explain what happened." "And you will," Miranda assured him. "But right now, we need to establish the facts and build our case. Your statement needs to be pristine." Marcus finally looked up from his coffee. "Our case. Against the Boston PD," Miranda clarified. "This goes beyond a simple complaint or even wrongful death. This is about a pattern of behavior that cost a child his life." The doorbell rang, interrupting them. Marcus glanced at his security tablet, showing a news van parked at the end of his driveway and a reporter standing at his door. "It's already hit the news," he said, unsurprised but wary. Miranda nodded. "Social media moves fast. Someone at the precinct or hospital must have leaked it." She pulled out her phone. "Don't answer. I'll issue a brief statement later today." Marcus silenced the bell and returned to the kitchen island. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, he admitted. If I had been more forceful or more submissive, or if I had taken a different route. Stop, Miranda said firmly. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. What happened to you, and by extension to Jacob, was the result of systemic issues that have existed for generations. The only difference is that you're in a position to challenge them. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from the hospital. He showed Miranda the screen. It's Dr. Abernathy, the hospital director. Miranda nodded. Answer, but keep it brief. Say you're with legal counsel and will be in touch soon. The conversation was exactly as Miranda had predicted, Abernathy expressing shock and sympathy, assuring Marcus that the hospital stood behind him, but also clearly concerned about the publicity and potential liability. Marcus ended the call feeling drained. They're afraid, he observed. Of course they are, Miranda replied. A prestigious hospital, a dead child and a race-based police incident involving their chief surgeon. It's a PR nightmare. And a family's tragic reality, Marcus added, a edge entering his voice. Jacob was brilliant. He wrote code at 14. His mother said he wanted to develop medical software after his recovery. Because of me. Miranda reached across the island and placed her hand over his. It was a rare gesture from the normally reserved attorney. Then make this count for him. Marcus nodded, resolve hardening within him. What do we do first? We'll prepare your statement detailed, factual, unemotional. She pulled out a recorder. Then we file a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. Simultaneously, I'll prepare the civil suit papers. Against the officers. Against them individually, yes, but more importantly, against the department and the city. Miranda's eyes flashed with determination. This isn't just about two officers who made a terrible judgment call. It's about the culture and policies that enabled them to make that call in the first place. Outside, more news vans were arriving. Marcus's phone was lighting up with calls and messages from colleagues, friends, even medical school classmates who had seen the early reports. Are you ready for this? Miranda asked, watching his face. Once we move forward, your life becomes public domain. Every aspect of your history, your career, your personal life, they'll scrutinize it all, trying to justify what happened. Marcus thought of his journey from a working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia to Harvard Medical School, through his residency, where he was often the only black face in the room, to becoming one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. He thought of his parents, both educators who had sacrificed everything for his education. He thought of his younger sister, a public defender in Chicago. And he thought of Jacob Peters, who would never grow up to write his medical software. I've spent my career cutting through damaged tissue to reach the heart, he said finally. I'm ready to do that for more than just my patients. Miranda nodded. Understanding the metaphor and the commitment it represented, she switched on the recorder. Dr. Marcus Washington, please state for the record what occurred on the morning of March 15, beginning with your drive to Boston Memorial Hospital. Marcus took a deep breath and began his testimony, precise, detailed, unflinching. Just as he would dictate surgical notes, just as he would present a case at M&M conference. The time had come to dissect a different kind of pathology. In the days that followed, Boston experienced the kind of media storm typically reserved for major political scandals or natural disasters. The story had everything: a renowned black surgeon, a dead white child, racial profiling, and a prestigious hospital in damage control mode. The narrative unfolded across screens and front pages with relentless momentum. Sur do ditanundi, TL parfar frians pielent, a CIA por arofang, AMFTRFL, Sarge L de la I, Offavars A and Ramel Pilaza Oridames ha etuive, A of IFBWS dom MRA, FAS, Kuhmusteins E, TATUSPI, Jacob Peters' parents. Thomas and Ellen initially remained secluded in their grief. When they finally emerged for a press conference 3 days after their son's death, the image was heartbreaking. Two shocked parents standing before microphones, holding a framed photo of their son. Jacob waited 11 months for that heart. Thomas Peters said, his voice breaking. We just want to understand how this could happen in Boston in 2024. Ellen Peters added, we don't blame Dr. Washington. We blame a system that saw his skin before it saw his credentials. Their statement stunned Boston and complicated the narrative for those who had hoped to frame the incident as a tragic but understandable police error. When asked if they would join any legal action, Thomas Peters' answer was unequivocal. "We stand with Dr. Washington. Our son would want that." Inside Boston Memorial, the atmosphere was tense. Some colleagues rallied around Marcus, while others maintained a careful distance, concerned about being drawn into controversy. Dr. Helen Chen, who had attempted the transplant in Marcus's absence, was on leave, devastated by the outcome despite having done everything medically possible. Marcus himself returned to the hospital 1 week after the incident, not to operate, but to meet with the board and medical staff. His entrance through the main lobby created a stir. Medical students, nurses, and patients watched as he walked to the elevators, his posture perfect, his expression resolute. In the boardroom, Hospital Director Abernathy opened with what he clearly believed was a conciliatory tone. "Mark, the board wants you to know we stand behind you completely." This was an unforeseeable tragedy. Marcus, dressed in a tailored suit rather than his usual scrubs or white coat, regarded him steadily. "It was foreseeable to me, James. I've been pulled over in Westland Hills 3 times in the past year, just driving to and from work. I mentioned it in our January Diversity Committee meeting. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. The Diversity Committee was widely considered a public relations exercise rather than a forum for substantive action. What matters now," Abernathy continued, "is managing this situation in a way that protects the hospital's reputation and allows you to return to your duties as soon as possible." "My duties," Marcus repeated. "A child died, James. My patient died because I was prevented from reaching him. My duty now is to ensure that doesn't happen to anyone else." Of course, Abernathy nodded quickly. "And we support improvements in police procedures. But your skills are needed in the operating room, not in a courtroom or at protest rallies." Marcus looked around the table, noting who met his eyes and who didn't. Most of the board members, predominantly white, predominantly male, seemed interested in their tablets or notepads. "I've performed over 2,000 surgeries at this hospital," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "I've generated millions in revenue, attracted top talent to our department, and maintained outcomes that rank us in the top 3 programs nationally. And yet, when I tell you that I experience racism that could impact patient care, it becomes a diversity committee footnote." Dr. Sarah Levine, one of the few women on the board and the head of oncology, spoke up. "Marcus, no one is dismissing your experiences. But surely you understand the delicate position the hospital is in. The Peters family could sue. They won't," Marcus said with certainty. "They understand what happened. The question is whether this institution does." He leaned forward. "I'm taking a 3-month leave of absence. During that time, I'll be pursuing legal action against the Boston PD. I expect Boston Memorial to cooperate fully with all requests for documentation regarding Jacob's case." Abernathy paled. 3 months, Marcus, your patients will be covered by my team, who I've already briefed." Marcus stood. "This isn't a negotiation, James. It's a courtesy notification. The papers are already with HR." As he turned to leave, Dr. Levine called after him. "What do you hope to accomplish, Marcus?" "Really?" He paused at the door. "When I open a chest for surgery, I don't just repair the immediate trauma. I look for underlying pathologies that could cause future failure. That's what I'm doing now." He left them in stunned silence, walking through halls that had once felt like home, but now seemed like territory to be reclaimed. Outside the hospital, Miranda was waiting in her car. "How did they take it?" she asked as he slid into the passenger seat. "About as expected," Marcus replied. "They want me in the OR, not on CNN." Miranda nodded unsurprised. "Speaking of which, the interview is confirmed for tomorrow. Anderson Cooper Live. Are you ready?" Marcus looked back at the hospital, the institution he had given 15 years of his life to, where he had saved hundreds of lives and trained dozens of surgeons. It was a good place filled with good people, but it was also part of a larger system that had failed Jacob Peters and would fail others if not confronted. "I'm ready," he said. Turning to Miranda, Let's make sure America understands exactly what's at stake. As they drove away, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Decker, Washington, this is Ellen Peters. When you're ready, Thomas and I would like to meet. Jacob would have wanted us to change things together. Marcus showed the message to Miranda, who nodded approval. This just got even more powerful, she said. The next chapter of Marcus Washington's life and Boston's reckoning with its systemic inequities was about to begin. The lights of the television studio were hotter than operating room lights, but Marcus sat comfortably under their glare. Across from him, Anderson Cooper reviewed his notes one final time before the producer's countdown. 3, 2. Good evening. Tonight we're talking with Dr. Marcus Washington, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Boston Memorial Hospital, whose detention by police had tragic consequences when a 14-year-old heart transplant patient died while Dr. Washington was being held at a police precinct. Dr. Washington, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, Anderson. I want to start with the basic timeline. Walk us through what happened that night. Marcus recounted the events with the same clinical precision he would use to describe a complex procedure. The late-night call, the donor heart becoming available, being pulled over for minor speeding, the officer's suspicion, the handcuffs, the tragic outcome. At what point did you realize the officers didn't believe you were actually a surgeon? Cooper asked. Almost immediately. Marcus replied. Officer Davis looked at my hospital ID as if it were a counterfeit bill. When I explained the urgency of the situation, they became more suspicious, not less. Why do you think that was? Marcus met Cooper's gaze directly. Because they couldn't reconcile the image of a black man as the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. I didn't fit their mental model of what a top surgeon looks like. The Boston Police Department has stated that the officers were following protocol for a vehicle that matched a description linked to drug trafficking. How do you respond to that? Tesla Model S, with physician plates and a Boston Memorial parking sticker, matched a drug trafficking vehicle. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's not just improbable, it's impossible. It's a post hoc justification for a stop that was based on one thing: racial profiling. Strong words, Cooper noted. Accurate words, Marcus countered. I've been pulled over in Westland Hills 3 times in the past year, always with the same vague explanation. The difference this time is that a child died as a result. Cooper shifted approach. You've had a distinguished career: Harvard Medical School, residency at Johns Hopkins, pioneering work in pediatric heart valve procedures. Has racism been a constant throughout your professional journey? Marcus considered the question. Medicine likes to view itself as a meritocracy, where only skill and knowledge matter. But the reality is more complicated. I've had patients request a different surgeon when they saw me. I've had colleagues express surprise at my qualifications. I've been mistaken for hospital staff rather than a physician more times than I can count. How have you dealt with that? I've excelled, Marcus said simply. I've published more, operated better, worked harder. The burden of exceptional performance is one every black professional knows intimately. And yet, despite all that excellence, when it mattered most, I was just another black man in a nice car in a white neighborhood at night. Marcus leaned forward slightly. The tragedy here is multi-layered. Jacob Peters lost his life. His parents lost their child, and America lost the future contributions of a brilliant young mind. You're pursuing legal action, Cooper noted. What do you hope to achieve? Justice, but not just in the conventional sense. Marcus's expression was resolute. I want structural changes in how police departments train officers, how they handle identity verification, how they address implicit bias. I want protocols that prevent this from happening to another surgeon, another patient. Do you think that's possible in the current climate? I think it's necessary, Marcus replied. And necessity has a way of creating possibility. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering the hospital's response, the surprising support from Jacob's parents, and the public reaction to the case. Throughout, Marcus maintained the calm, authoritative presence that had made him a respected figure in medicine. But now, That authority was being directed at a different kind of diagnosis, a societal one. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Cooper leaned across and shook his hand. "Powerful stuff, Doctor. This will get people talking." "Talking is just the beginning," Marcus replied. "But thank you." As he left the studio, his phone buzzed with messages. The first was from Miranda. "You killed it. Carl's already coming in from other networks." The second was from Ellen Peters. "Watching you tonight gave me the first moment of peace since we lost Jacob. Thank you for speaking his name with such dignity." The third was from Dr. Helen Chen. The residents gathered in the lounge to watch. "You're changing more than laws, Marcus. You're changing minds." Marcus texted brief replies, then leaned back in the car that was taking him to his hotel. The interview would air in an hour, and Boston, along with the rest of America, would have to confront uncomfortable truths about who was valued, who was believed, and who was expendable in a system that claimed equality but practiced something else entirely. His phone rang. It was Miranda again. "The Boston PD just issued a statement," she said without preamble. "They're announcing an internal review of the incident and the officer's conduct. PR damage control," Marcus assessed. "Yes, but it's a start," Miranda replied. "And the mayor's office called. They want a meeting. They're worried about the lawsuit." "Of course they are. A wrongful death case involving racial profiling and a celebrity surgeon. They should be worried." Miranda's tone shifted to something more contemplative. "But Marcus, this is also an opportunity. Real change often happens when institutions fear the consequences of maintaining the status quo." Marcus gazed out at the Boston skyline, the city he had called home for 15 years. "Set up the meeting," he said. "But make it clear that I'm not interested in a settlement that only involves money. I want commitments to specific reforms." "Already drafting the list," Miranda assured him. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." After they hung up, Marcus found himself thinking about Jacob's parents. They had lost everything, yet they were channeling their grief into supporting his cause. Their grace humbled him. He pulled up the message from Ellen Peters and replied more fully. "Your support means more than I can express. Jacob's legacy will be not just the lives he touched, but the lives he will save through the changes we make together." As he pressed send, Marcus felt the weight of that promise. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about transformation. And transformation, like healing, began with pain. The mayor's office in Boston City Hall was designed to project authority and history. Heavy wooden furniture, portraits of previous mayors lining the walls, large windows overlooking the plaza below. Mayor Rebecca Chen, the first Asian American woman to hold the office, sat behind her imposing desk, flanked by the city attorney and the police commissioner. Across from them sat Marcus, Miranda, and somewhat surprisingly, Thomas and Ellen Peters. The Peters' presence had been Marcus's idea, a reminder of the human cost behind the legal and political maneuvering. "First," Mayor Chen began, "I want to express my deepest condolences to the Peters family. The loss of your son is a tragedy that should never have happened." Thomas Peters nodded stiffly, his hand gripping his wife's. "And Dr. Washington," the mayor continued, "what you experienced that night was unacceptable. I want you to know that I am committed to addressing the issues this incident has revealed." Miranda smiled thinly. "With all due respect, Mayor Chen, we're here to discuss specific commitments, not general assurances." Police Commissioner Grant, a veteran officer with 30 years on the force, leaned forward. "We've already placed Officers Davis and Reynolds on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Our Internal Affairs Division is conducted by fellow officers, reviewing the actions of their colleagues." Miranda interjected. "That's part of the problem we're addressing today." The commissioner bristled. "Ems Jackson, we take these matters very seriously. So seriously that a 14-year-old boy died while a distinguished surgeon was handcuffed in your precinct." Miranda countered. "Forgive us if we find the standard review procedures insufficient." Mayor Chen raised a hand to de-escalate. "We're all here because we recognize that changes are needed. The question is what those changes should look like." Marcus spoke for the first time. "I've prepared a document outlining the reforms we believe are necessary. He slid folders across the desk to each of the officials. These include independent oversight of police, misconduct investigations, mandatory body cameras with automatic upload to secured servers, revised protocols for identity verification in emergency situations, and comprehensive bias training developed in partnership with community leaders. The city attorney, Richard Okonkwo, opened his folder and scanned the contents. This is extensive. So was the failure that led to Jacob's death. Ellen Peters said quietly, her first words since entering the room. My son waited nearly a year for his heart. When it finally came, the system that should have protected him instead ensured he would never receive it. The room fell silent as her words settled over them. Commissioner Grant looked down, Mayor Chen's expression softened, and even the city attorney seemed momentarily at a loss. We're not here to assign individual blame, Marcus continued after a respectful pause. Officers Davis and Reynolds made terrible decisions, but they were operating within a system that enabled those decisions. That's what needs to change. Mayor Chen studied Marcus. These proposals will face significant resistance from the police union. You understand that? I do. Marcus nodded. And you understand that our lawsuit will proceed unless meaningful reforms are implemented. The court of public opinion is already rendering its verdict, and the legal courts will likely follow. It wasn't a threat so much as a statement of fact. The CNN interview had generated national headlines. Social media was flooded with support for Marcus and the Peters family. Medical associations were issuing statements calling for reform. Even police accountability groups from across the country had reached out to offer resources and support. The city attorney cleared his throat. Perhaps we could discuss a settlement that addresses some of these concerns while... No. Thomas Peters interrupted firmly. My son is not a bargaining chip. We're not interested in money. We're interested in making sure that no other family experiences what we have. Commissioner Grant shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Peters, I respect your position, but some of these proposals require contract negotiations, budget approvals, and policy overhauls that can't happen overnight. We're not expecting overnight transformation, Miranda clarified. We're expecting a binding commitment to a clear timeline, with specific benchmarks and independent verification. Mayor Chen looked between the faces across from her desk, the grieving parents, the determined surgeon, the formidable attorney, and seemed to come to a decision. Here's what I can offer today, she said, straightening in her chair. A public task force on police reform, co-chaired by a community representative of your choosing, and a law enforcement representative selected with your input. The task force will have 90 days to review these proposals and make formal recommendations that my office commits to implementing. Miranda looked skeptical. Task forces can be where good ideas go to die, Mayor Chen. Not this one. The mayor insisted. I'll issue an executive order today establishing it, with full funding and staffing, and I'm prepared to implement the body camera requirement immediately, without waiting for the task force recommendation. We have the equipment. It's been sitting in storage due to union negotiations. Marcus exchanged glances with Miranda, who gave a small nod. That would be a meaningful first step. Marcus acknowledged, but we would need certain guarantees about the task force's authority and the implementation of its findings. I think we can work out those details. Mayor Chen replied, relief evident in her voice. She turned to the Peters. Would that approach address your concerns? Ellen Peters looked at her husband, then at Marcus. If Dr. Washington believes this will lead to real change, we support it. Jacob would have wanted practical solutions, not just symbolic victories. The tension in the room noticeably decreased as the framework of an agreement began to take shape. For the next hour, they hammered out details: who would serve on the task force, what its scope would be, how its recommendations would be implemented, and what oversight mechanisms would ensure compliance. When they finally stood to leave, Mayor Chen approached Marcus and extended her hand. Dr. Washington, I wish we had met under different circumstances, but I believe that from this tragedy, we can create meaningful change. Marcus shook her hand firmly. I hope you're right, Mayor. For all our sakes. Outside City Hall, a small group of reporters had gathered. alerted to the meeting by sources within the building. Miranda stepped forward to make a brief statement, while Marcus escorted the Peters to a waiting car. "You did well in there," Ellen said to Marcus as they walked. "Jacob would have been proud. I keep thinking about him," Marcus admitted. "I never even got to operate on him, but I feel connected to his story in a way I can't fully explain." Thomas Peters nodded. "You're carrying his legacy forward. That creates a powerful bond." He hesitated, then added, "Ellen and I were thinking, Jacob's birthday is next month. He would have been 15. We'd like to announce a scholarship in his name at that time for minority students pursuing medical careers." Marcus felt a surge of emotion. That would be remarkable. "We'd like you to help us design it," Ellen added, "to ensure it makes a real difference, the way Jacob would have wanted." Before Marcus could respond, Miranda rejoined them, her expression triumphant. "The mayor just announced the task force and the immediate implementation of body cameras. It's already hitting the wires." It was a victory, small perhaps in comparison to the loss that had precipitated it, but significant nonetheless. As they drove away from City Hall, Marcus found himself thinking not of the officials they had just left, but of officers Davis and Reynolds. He wondered if they were watching the news, if they understood yet the magnitude of what their actions had caused. And he wondered if they too might somehow be part of the healing process that was just beginning. The transformation of ducting Marcus Washington from surgeon to activist happened gradually, then suddenly, like many significant changes in society. In the 3 months following Jacob's death, his name became synonymous with a growing movement for accountability and reform in policing practices nationwide. The Boston Police Reform Task Force, as promised by Mayor Chen, began its work with unprecedented transparency. Community meetings were held across the city, with particularly large turnouts in neighborhoods that had historically experienced the most problematic police interactions. Marcus attended many of these sessions, listening more than speaking, absorbing the stories of citizens whose experiences mirrored his own, but who lacked his platform and privilege. Officers Davis and Reynolds had been terminated following an expedited internal investigation that found multiple violations of department policy. Both were contesting their firings through the police union, a process that would likely take months to resolve. Neither had spoken publicly about the incident, though their attorneys had issued statements expressing regret while maintaining that they had followed their training. At Boston Memorial, Marcus's 3-month leave of absence was nearing its end. The question of his return loomed large, both for him and for the institution that had been his professional home for so long. "Have you decided?" Dr. Helen Chen asked one evening over dinner at Marcus's home. She had stepped in as acting department chief during his absence and had proved to be both a skilled administrator and a loyal friend. Marcus swirled the water in his glass, watching the lemon slice spin. "I miss surgery," he admitted. "I miss my patients, the residents, the focus of the operating room." "We miss you too," Helen said. "The department isn't the same without you." "But," Marcus prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. Helen smiled sadly. "But I wonder if you can go back to just being Dr. Washington the surgeon after everything that's happened. The task force, the national interviews, the speaking engagements, you've become something more, something different." Marcus corrected. "Not necessarily more. The residents see you differently now," Helen continued. "You're not just teaching them medicine anymore. You're showing them what it means to use their position to create systemic change." Marcus considered this. The past months had been exhausting, but also profoundly fulfilling. He had spoken at medical schools, testified before state legislators, consulted with police departments in other cities, looking to preemptively address similar issues. The Jacob Peters Memorial Scholarship had been announced on what would have been Jacob's 15th birthday, with an initial endowment large enough to support 5 students annually through medical school. "I've been thinking about a hybrid role," Marcus finally said. "Clinical work 2 days a week, with the rest of my time dedicated to the reform initiatives. Boston Memorial could establish a center for health equity and justice that would merge these worlds." Helen's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. Marcus. The board would approve it in a heartbeat, especially now that Abernathy is out. The hospital director had resigned a month after Jacob's death, following revelations that he had dismissed previous concerns about racial profiling affecting hospital staff. His replacement, Dr. Maya Rodriguez, had already indicated her support for Marcus's continued advocacy work. "I'll need to discuss it with Miranda first," Marcus noted. "There are still legal considerations with the civil case." The lawsuit against the Boston Police Department was proceeding. Those settlement discussions were ongoing. The city had signaled willingness to accept many of the terms Marcus and the Peters family were seeking, particularly with the task force's preliminary findings supporting most of their proposed reforms. Later that night, after Helen had left, Marcus sat in his home office reviewing a draft of the task force's interim report. The recommendations were surprisingly robust: independent oversight, revised training protocols, community involvement in officer evaluation, and specific procedures for emergency situations involving medical personnel. His phone rang. It was Miranda. "Have you seen it?" she asked without preamble. "The task force report. I'm reading it now. It's stronger than I expected." "Not the report," Miranda said, her voice tense with suppressed excitement. Officer Reynolds reached out through his attorney. "He wants to meet off the record. No department representatives present." Marcus sat up straighter. "What? Why?" He didn't say specifically, but his attorney hinted that he wants to contribute to the reform efforts. Apparently, he's been doing some soul searching. "Do you think it's legitimate?" Marcus asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "I think it's worth hearing him out." Miranda replied carefully. "This could be significant, Marcus. An officer directly involved, speaking out about the cultural issues within the department. That's powerful testimony." Marcus was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected development. The image of Officer Reynolds's face that night, the dismissive smirk, the casual disregard was still vivid in his memory. "Where and when?" he finally asked. "Tomorrow, neutral location. My office." Another long pause. "I'll be there." After ending the call, Marcus walked to his living room window, gazing out at the quiet Concord night. He had spent months channeling his anger and grief into productive action, building something meaningful from the tragedy of Jacob's death. But he hadn't confronted the human agents of that tragedy directly until now. What would he say to Officer Reynolds? What could Reynolds possibly say to him? And would this encounter represent healing, or simply reopen wounds that had barely begun to close? Miranda's office occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone in Back Bay, its interior a blend of traditional law firm gravitas and contemporary design that reflected its founder's personality. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to center himself for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Reynolds arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his attorney, a grave-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia Dunham. The former officer was dressed in civilian clothes, slacks, and a button-down shirt rather than a uniform. Without his badge and gun, he seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than in Marcus's memory. Miranda handled the introductions with professional detachment, then outlined the ground rules. "This meeting is off the record and without prejudice to the ongoing legal proceedings. Nothing said here will be directly quoted in court or to the media without all parties' consent. We're here to listen, not to negotiate." Reynolds nodded, glancing nervously at Marcus before focusing on a spot on the conference table. His attorney spoke first. "Daka Washington. My client requested this meeting because he wants to acknowledge, personally and directly, the impact of his actions on the night of March 15th. He understands that no apology can undo what happened, but he believes it's important for you to hear from him nonetheless." Marcus nodded once, his expression neutral. "I'm listening." Reynolds cleared his throat, finally looking up to meet Marcus's gaze. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard with what appeared to be months of stress and, perhaps, regret. "Dr. Washington," he began, his voice hoarse. "There's nothing I can say that will bring back Jacob Peters or undo the pain I've caused his family and you. But I need you to know that I've been destroyed by what happened that night." He swallowed hard. "Not nearly as destroyed as that family, I know that. But I haven't slept through the night since then. I can't stop seeing that boy's face in the news stories. Marcus remained silent, his expression unchanged. I joined the force to help people. Reynolds continued, seeming to gain some momentum. My dad was a cop. His dad was a cop. It's all I ever wanted to be. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing threats instead of people. And that night, when we pulled you over... He hesitated. I didn't see a doctor. I didn't see a professional. I saw exactly what I'd been trained to see, a threat that didn't match my environment. Trained to see. Marcus repeated, speaking for the first time. You're suggesting your actions were the result of your training. Reynolds looked to his attorney briefly, then back to Marcus. Yes and no. The formal training tells us one thing, but the culture teaches something else. You learn from the older officers, from what gets rewarded, from the stories told in the locker room. You learn which stops get you praised and which ones get you eye rolls. Miranda leaned forward slightly. Are you saying there's a culture of racial profiling within the department? I'm saying there's a culture of assumptions. Reynolds clarified. Rich neighborhoods, expensive cars, certain times of night, it all feeds into a calculus of suspicion. And yes, race is a factor in that calculus, whether it's acknowledged or not. Marcus studied the man across from him, not much older than some of his residents, probably raised with decent values, now permanently marked by a terrible judgment call that had cost a child's life. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked directly. What do you want from this meeting? Reynolds seemed startled by the bluntness of the question. I don't want anything from you, Doctor. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. He faltered. I want to contribute to making sure this never happens again. I've been working with a therapist, examining my biases, understanding how I ended up making the decisions I made that night, and I realized I have perspective from inside the system that might be useful to your reform efforts. Marcus exchanged glances with Miranda, whose slight nod encouraged him to explore this further. How exactly would you contribute? Marcus asked. Reynolds straightened slightly. I've documented specific examples of problematic practices I witnessed during my 7 years on the force. Informal quotas for certain types of stops, targeting of specific neighborhoods, the unwritten rules about which complaints get investigated seriously and which get buried. I'm willing to testify about all of it to the task force, to department leadership, to whoever needs to hear it. Even though it might further damage your reputation, even though the union would consider it a betrayal, Miranda asked. My reputation is already gone, Reynolds said simply. And as for the union, maybe they need to reconsider what they're protecting. Officer safety isn't just about defending every action no matter how wrong. It's about creating a system where officers and citizens trust each other. The room fell silent as Marcus considered what he was hearing. Was this genuine remorse and a desire for redemption, or a calculated attempt to mitigate the consequences of Reynolds' actions? And ultimately, did his motivation matter if the outcome benefited the cause of reform? Officer Davis. Marcus finally said. Is he part of this offer? Reynolds shook his head. No, he believes we were just doing our job that night. He's focusing on fighting the termination. Marcus nodded, having expected as much. He turned to Miranda. Your thoughts? Testimony from a former officer about internal culture and practices would be powerful, she acknowledged. Particularly in conjunction with the task force recommendations, it would be harder to dismiss as outsider criticism. Marcus turned back to Reynolds. And I stress if we were to accept your offer, I would have conditions. Name them. Reynolds said immediately. First, you would need to make a public statement accepting full responsibility for your actions that night. No qualifications, no deflection to training or culture. Reynolds nodded. I'm prepared to do that. Second, you would need to meet with the Peters family. If they're willing, they deserve to hear directly from you. Reynolds paled visibly but nodded again. Yes, of course. Third, your testimony would need to be specific, detailed, and verifiable wherever possible. Names, dates, incidents. Not generalized observations about culture. I've already documented everything, Reynolds assured him. Dates, badge numbers, locations, it's all there. Marcus studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of insincerity or calculation. What he saw instead was a broken man seeking atonement, not to erase his guilt, but to give it purpose. "I'll discuss this with the Peters family and with the task force leadership," Marcus finally said. "If they're receptive, we'll move forward." Relief washed over Reynolds' face. "Thank you, Doctor. I know I don't deserve." Marcus raised a hand to stop him. "This isn't about what you deserve, Officer Reynolds. It's about what serves the cause of justice and reform. Don't mistake procedural cooperation for personal forgiveness." The distinction hung in the air between them, clear, uncompromising, but not cruel. Reynolds nodded his understanding. As the meeting concluded and they all stood to leave, Reynolds hesitated, then spoke one final time. "Dr. Washington, I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry for Jacob, for his family, and for what I took from you that night, the chance to save him." Marcus felt the familiar ache that had become his constant companion these past months, grief for a patient he never got to treat, anger at a system that had made his skill and training irrelevant in the face of bias. "Make your testimony count," was all he said as he turned to leave. That's the only apology that matters now. As spring turned to summer in Boston, the pace of change accelerated. Officer Reynolds' testimony to the Police Reform Task Force sent shockwaves through the department and city government. His detailed accounts of problematic practices, corroborated by documentation he had secretly maintained, provided a roadmap for specific reforms that went beyond general principles. The Peters family, after careful consideration, agreed to meet with Reynolds. The conversation, which Marcus attended as a supportive presence, was painful but ultimately productive. Reynolds' unvarnished admission of responsibility, without excuses or qualifications, gave Thomas and Ellen Peters something they had been missing: a human face to the system that had failed their son. "We don't forgive you," Thomas Peters had said plainly at the conclusion of that difficult meeting. "But we acknowledge your effort to prevent other families from experiencing our pain. That counts for something." By late July, the Boston Police Reform Task Force released its final report, with recommendations even more comprehensive than its preliminary findings. Mayor Chen, true to her word, began implementation immediately, starting with the most critical reforms. 1. Mandatory body cameras for all officers, with footage automatically uploaded to secure servers accessible to independent oversight bodies. 2. New protocols for identity verification, with specific provisions for medical personnel and other emergency responders. 3. A civilian oversight board with subpoena power and the authority to recommend disciplinary actions. 4. Comprehensive bias training developed in partnership with community organizations and academic institutions. 5. Revision of performance metrics to emphasize community engagement. And D. Escalation rather than number of stops or arrests. Not every recommendation was adopted without modification, and the police union continued to resist certain changes. But the momentum was undeniable. What had begun as a tragedy was transforming into a model for reform that other cities were beginning to study and emulate. At Boston Memorial, Marcus returned to a modified role that reflected his new reality. 2 days a week in surgery, where his skills remained as sharp as ever. 1 day dedicated to teaching and mentoring, with a new emphasis on preparing medical professionals to navigate systemic barriers. And 2 days leading the hospital's newly established Center for Health Equity and Justice, which quickly became a nexus for research and advocacy at the intersection of healthcare and social justice. The civil lawsuit against the Boston Police Department was settled in August, with terms that included significant financial compensation for the Peters family and funding for ongoing reform initiatives. More importantly, it included binding commitments to maintain the newly implemented policies regardless of changes in political leadership. As the 1-year anniversary of Jacob's death approached, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey, both personal and public, that had unfolded since that terrible night. He had never sought to become an activist or a symbol. He had simply wanted to provide the best possible care for his patients. But circumstances had demanded more of him, and he had answered that call. One evening, as he left the hospital after performing a successful valve replacement on a 12-year-old girl, Marcus encountered Ellen Peters in the lobby. She was carrying a box of brochures for the Jacob Peters Memorial Scholarship, which she had been discussing with the hospital's foundation office. "Dr. Washington." She greeted him warmly. "How was your surgery today?" "Textbook perfect." He smiled. "Lee should make a full recovery." Ellen's eyes shone with a mixture of joy and sadness. "Another family that gets to take their child home." Marcus nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind her words. "The scholarship applications have been remarkable this year," he said. "Jacob would be proud of the students who will carry his name forward." "That's actually why I wanted to see you," Ellen said, setting down her box. "Thomas and I have been thinking. The anniversary is coming up next month." "I know," Marcus said softly. "I've been thinking about it too." "We don't want it to be just a day of mourning," Ellen continued. "We want it to be a day of action, of commitment to the changes we've been working toward." "What did you have in mind?" Ellen reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "We're calling it Jacob's Promise, a day of service and education focused on healthcare equity and justice reform." Boston Memorial has already agreed to host a symposium. The mayor's office will announce the full implementation of the task force recommendations. And we'd like you to deliver the keynote address. Marcus accepted the folder, deeply moved by the Peters family's continued strength and vision. "I would be honored." As they walked together toward the hospital exit, Ellen asked a question that caught Marcus by surprise. "Do you still feel angry when you think about that night?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Yes," he admitted. "Not constantly, not all-consuming, but it's still there. I don't think it ever fully goes away." Ellen nodded. "Me too. But I've realized something over this past year. The anger isn't just destructive. It can be clarifying. It can burn away what doesn't matter and illuminate what does." Surgical precision in emotional form, Marcus observed with a small smile. "Exactly." Ellen stopped at the hospital entrance. Jacob wanted to create medical software that would help doctors save more lives. He won't get to do that now. But through you, through this work, through all the changes that have happened, because you refused to let his death be meaningless, he's still saving lives, isn't he? Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Yes, he is. Then we keep going," Ellen said simply, squeezing his arm once before turning to leave. "Why keep the promise we made to him?" As Marcus watched her walk away, he thought about promises, the oath he had taken as a physician, the commitment he had made to the Peters family, and the ongoing pledge to transform a broken system, each one a thread in the complex tapestry of healing, justice, and hope that had emerged from tragedy. Dr. Marcus Washington had entered medicine to save lives with his hands. Now he was saving them with his voice, his experience, and his unyielding commitment to a world where skill and compassion weren't limited by the color of one's skin or the biases of those in power. In the operating room the next morning, preparing for a complex aortic repair, Marcus felt the familiar calm descend over him, the focused precision that had defined his surgical career. But now that precision extended beyond the operating table to the delicate work of excising injustice from the systems meant to protect and serve. "Scalpel," he said to the scrub nurse, his voice clear and confident. It was time to begin another day of healing.